So there's something talked about today's lesson, something left from yesterday, and for that there will be two verses I cited, both are from Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom. The first is verse 18 from the 24th chapter, and the other verse is the first verse from the 22nd chapter of that same chapter. 我这个音这个字把它改成非韵，非韵非不韵，此语不相在，如来不有韵，何处有如来？你说他把这两个寄送呢结合起来做一个介绍。但这个送的给说了很腻的，搞这个的送的，的冷静些是，这冷静些，地头的上当或者是这送的，可能送这个。So with regard to the 24th chapter, so there are two verses. So before I think one verse, so it's two verses, verse 18 and 19. And those two verses, as Horace usually says, one should memorize and one should reflect upon. 야, 참상라 단다디, 접신이 니버기 고데. 풍미 풍불리 심이 디신시부 본데미. 텔레데미 데데미, 알랭이라 텔레데미 데데미로 디신시부 본데미 디신시부 관심이시. 디체디 규르체 아니 가르사 풍미 풍불리 심이 아니 텔레데미 데데미 아니 마시죠 풍데미 마시죠 관심이시 디신시부세에 잡디 것이 좀 어디 답하게 디 땡규 상무단에 오요를 뒤에 숨고도 So Thomas usually says that actually before those two other verses, which will come slightly later, these other two verses from the 24th chapter on independent rising is the first verse from the 22nd chapter that we should think about. So actually it means he is not the aggregate, so this refers to the Kadagata or the Buddha. He is not the aggregate and not different from the aggregates, etc. So it all refers to the Buddha, to the Tathagata. But here we should use it with respect to the I. I am not the aggregates and not different from the aggregates. The aggregates are not in me, nor am I in the aggregates. The I does not possess the aggregates. What is the I? So if you should read it that way, and again as Horace has said, that one should think about, one should contemplate on this verse. 가장 비저서도 주문에 지도도 뭐 주버시 뒤다 딜이 제로 당뒤다 고문을 마송레세 책이 뒤래다 때때버지 때버는 메죠 디가나 아니 벌린다 하자면 부부 초보다 아니 이디 네베점이 뒤 So, as said yesterday, or as explained yesterday, with regard to the reason for why phenomena do not exist inherently, there's a reason because they're free from being truly or inherently one and truly different. And as also discussed yesterday, Nagarjuna describes 5 extremes. So those 5 extremes are described here in this verse. Not the aggregates, not different from the aggregates, and so forth. So those are the 5 kind of extremities, or the 5 extremes, of which the I is empty. And then Chandrakirti added 2 more extremes, saying the I is not the collection of the aggregates,
and it's not the form of the aggregates, the shape of the aggregates.
다 차진적으로 두치니 다 samudana cikdi 되니 samudana 인디나 cik디에들 펜도지에 유로체 뇌지에 유되어지 다 펜도 가지고서는 cik디 차진이 디지디요 디게소 태지 디토의 samudana지 디에 펜도 유로체 뇌에 가지고서는 엔진디 오지 인지라 야디기 뇌에 가지고서는 cik디마 되네 숍숍숍숍 cik디 cik디에 서르체 심을 구조 테마티 지도내어지 다른 차소스 연산이 차소스 어제도 베베기 왕시 컨데모 부치디에디 담보담보 디마로 고메로 하다 고메디 남성비다 뭐 용디 엔치마 줄기 고메이나 엔티 좀더 얘기 치도 뒤로 아빠라지라 안 삼로에 담고 와지 안 칸데 규버 대칭로 다디 초진의 내려서로 싫어
So, with regard to anything that is made of parts, that is hot, so it's helpful to think about it, to reflect, to contemplate this verse. But actually contemplating this verse, to think about it, to reflect on this on a daily basis, has benefits and it has disadvantages. The benefits are, of course, that one contemplates this verse and in that way remembers the ideas that are being indicated. So one makes an effort to actually every day, daily think of this concept or think of these five extremes or the absence of these five extremes. On the other hand, the danger is that if one does this on a daily basis, it becomes some kind of habit. One just recites it and has a sense that's all right for today. So there's no real change to the mind. It doesn't really affect the mind. One has a sense, okay, I've recited it today, I'm done. Tomorrow I've recited it, I'm done. Or tomorrow I will recite it, so what I need to do, I'm done. So that is similar to prayers. When we recite daily prayers, actually the purpose of those prayers is to help us to understand what we need to think about, what we need to contemplate, what we need to visualize. However, initially that's what we do, but then later on, then as a result of familiarity with the prayer, we just recite the prayer without thinking of it. So reciting this becomes like reciting a prayer in that way.
돈이 도동 어지 현상이 지래 담보 삼다당이나 표지 그만 유슈가 삼노마다나 뜻은 그저 택하고 이기래 담보 삼당이나 다 삼당의 정도로 태사나 아니 그만 니수 놀래 신구저 태무로 진짜 경험을 미치는 신은 철주된 거 위해서다 이만 지금 돈이 때 있는 것은 내 담보하는 신진이 고래요 말하다 이만까지 대 차이 있고 그만 같이 있는 거 대마다 심
So, for someone who has already an understanding of emptiness, knows already what emptiness refers to, well, they don't need to think that much about it over long periods of time. Just for short periods, it will be sufficient. But for someone who's new, who's totally new to emptiness, then 20 minutes, 30 minutes, though that should be the time at least one spends daily for some change to come to the mind. In order to really transform the mind or bring some change, this is the least amount one should spend on a daily basis thinking about emptiness. For someone who has already some experience, who has already some understanding, 5 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes is sufficient. So like His Holiness says 17 times, His Holiness thinks of emptiness, contemplates emptiness every day. So this is different from a beginner. Here in this case, since His Holiness has strong influence, influence from a previous life, therefore it's not necessary to spend a long period. But for someone who doesn't have that influence, who doesn't have the proper understanding, this would be too short.
중앙은 전주세미나 거기 뜻삼을 땅제 sem을 구조 태위 토네 전주세미 도번에 해야 되는데 이 말을 잘 숨쉬 차진 지위에 숨도 더 지나지는 잘 두두 제고라 딜레디다 거기 잘 인제디 완치루스 당입니다 이거 뭐지 잘 숨쉬 차진 거기 sem을 구조 태워지는 전주세미 능기 숨디 다 잘인이디 완치루스 제제 맞다 이런 말
So actually, as His Holiness says, And with regard to the chitta, on a daily basis, one should retell the vows in a way in which the mind is really moved. So His Holiness usually says he does so 3 to 4 times daily. Actually, it's 6 times that you could do this. I mean, about 6 times you take the Bodhisattva vow. But what we usually do, what seems to be sufficient in our case, is 2 times. So actually, 3 to 4 times would be a good amount of time in terms of retaking the Bodhisattva vows, but by way of having the mind moved every time one takes the Bodhisattva vow. 可是依法王来说呢，他每一次开天营做的这个3到4次，他都是在深切思维菩提心有感受的状况下来去受菩萨戒。
딱 지디 네 가장 긴 수명이 디 지디 전에 배전하고 다가도 돈이 또해디 임베스 돈이 시르기 슈기 나서 마다에 디 임베스로 막 송샤도 다 디지디 딱 간제스 용그레 디 성당에 지르셔다 지다 다다디 가르시고레 다다 디지시기도 라발다 마스유나 아니 경시지 친나로지 따디 나서 총을 주고 되었어. 경시에디 친질로 다는 다른 거 도구로 와 라바디 안 나서 총 레벨 생기 버릴 때 대신 그거 안 나서 총을 주고 그랬어. 가르치는 레시디 그 다른 거 통도 수수기만 힘을 잡으지 철미 레벨 디기레스 된지다이도 더 뒤에는 오늘은 랑진지 총을 줘도 그 다음에 또지 딱 내기 인세디 슈디마 자용도 나서 마 자쇼도 이제로 테스트 잡도
So in the scripture, again, as in Kippa yesterday, he said that actually what he said that in the scriptures it talks about that according to the scriptures that when one realizes something directly through the force of that, through the force of realizing emptiness directly, that there's no more pain experienced. And so this is really something that makes sense. It's according to the scriptures. So this is something to really think about how that is the case. For example, neuroscientists have found that when you have, for example, a wound on your hand, and if you take a telescope, if you use binoculars, so when you use binoculars and you turn them around, then everything will be seen from a distance. So everything will be seen from a distance in such a way that when you look at the wound, if you look at the wound of your hand, there is a sense that this is not your hand. So therefore there is less pain. And so what Genla explained was that this means because of the self-centeredness, the mind that cherishes oneself, that kind of self-grasping mind, or the mind that cherishes the self, is kind of weakened in that moment. There's a sense this is not my hand, and therefore, with these binoculars being turned upside down and looking at this wound, pain will be reduced. So again, we're saying that could be similar to the case before that was brought up by Tula when he said by realizing emptiness directly, there's no more physical pain.
Now, what should I belong to your quality cognizance? Cognizance should be age. You need temperature. Peggy contain not a Diana Lone Shuchi racing. The Nasa down the Nasa shoot out shoot age. That the Mendi should the Mendi run and Mendi Chicken Mataragmino. The Harla May you was a many penguins. Consider what in the Chiva. Then Nasa town, and Jaharmendi, she made it some Ragmaro. Any Jaharmendi, Pengio Mare. And she had married, and was tangled at Tavi Zondi. Any Tanda the Kumbulutuki, Mujitano, Diora, Dala Teta Diminci, Tagima Litimisho Sage. Peggy Sinjing to me that it was some one of me, the Mahina's economy, and in 80 some machine of me shall say, my Deondi, Tenji, Samastandi, my child, Betty the Meva Machane, shoot at my child. That Karchini Chagi, you made it to hit your mother. Digi, Tony, Korangi, Komulu to the Tevashi. When Jim, the Komulu to the Tevashi city, 돈이 걸려 드시잖아요. 공부를 되고 이게 뭐 보여라. 딱 그러면 미세다. 디 측지들이 가요라요. 쉬우지 편만 인자, 편기 요 인자 아니 공부를 쉬우지 되고 되야지. 그래서 뒤에 테스트 찍잖아. 테스트 당하디 내 거라. 테스트 삼려놓으라. 테스트 리거라. 딘디다 저요 시기라.
So Geshe was saying he has an acquaintance or companion or friend who's a bhikkhu, he's a holy of India, and he doesn't remember his name, but anyway, so this person has incredibly strong headaches, so I guess in English we call it like migraines. So he's gone to see his doctor about it, about these really profound headaches, and the doctor has himself, the doctor had told him that he suffers from a very severe case of migraine. But in medicine that he requires, the medicine that would actually help him to relieve him from this pain, cannot be found in India. So there is Indian medicine available, but that medicine doesn't really help him. And the only medicine that helps him is medicine that comes from the West. However, he doesn't always get that kind of medicine. So oftentimes he ends up just having to bear his pain because Indian medicine doesn't help. He doesn't have the medicine required from the West. He doesn't get it. So therefore, he has found that there's a line from Nagarjuna in Nagarjuna's scripture where it says that may all the suffering of sentient beings come upon me. So whatever problems and difficulties there are, may they ripen upon me. So therefore, so may all the suffering ripen upon me. May my virtue ripen upon them. So this line, he's thinking about this line. He's reflecting on this line again and again when this strong pain arises, that may all the problems and difficulties. This is from the Ratnavali, this verse. So in the Ratnavali it says that may all the suffering be ripen upon me. So he thinks along those lines, and it really seems to help. So his headache, his migraine gets weaker when he thinks of this mind. So he doesn't know why, but he generated great faith in Nagarjuna. So usually people generate great faith in Nagarjuna when, independent on his writings, they understand emptiness better. But in his case, it is this particular verse because it is really practical. He found this very practical. So it's probably because you give up the self in that moment. There's a sense of giving up the self. So that is probably the reason why his headache is being weak, or you find some relief.
Tati kisi tingmune ina ta namjun thaje tarjum bala pa nare yoba kiji she di samdang ko yachire. Tenge ta inshasha ji di na shisago rigimida kanda kanine. Inshasha je she gyoti kanine shisago yomida. Chisa ta ngima inshasha ji ni tongong di le me inza shisago yomai. Ta shini yanjo ju wan thaje tarjum na se di. 초와 동해랑 여기 초와 동해 용구 요래베 마스에도 요르바 마스에다 디디 요리 참에 아니 기지시고 요래베 초와 동해랑 요래래디야 식사고 지는 다결 경우가 있으랬다 좋아.
So independent on this question that Dukala asked, so here the question that arises therefore whether an arhat or a bodhisattva with remainder really experiences pain, really experiences physical pain. So there are these scriptural quotes or passages that talk about that there is sickness, that sickness is experienced, that they may hurt themselves, as in like physically the body may be injured. But Geshe-la Sokpa just took this as a given that it means an arhat or bodhisattva with remainder still experiences physical pain. But now he has to rethink it. He has to rethink this issue. He has to go into detail on this, whether that's truly the case. So he will go into more and he will investigate this further, that in the sense that yes, there is still injury that is possible, there may still be physical injury, but that kind of injury is free from any kind of physical pain. So there's no kind of experience in that sense for that.
That you 다 기시 딘디 임바이나 안 딘징네네 코 디오니비 로 딘딘디 요르와스 똑바디 디기 나사파게 네 딘징디기다 나세기 이견체부터 차도라 디기 나세기 이견마체 디치바카레스 조무시 디레데요 지선다 딜라 아니 지단다 디톨라다 파게 트레닝진이 니 섬지 주요래 야 섬지 디가는 전에지나 페이지 취지 니 걸루 다만 와제 여기 섬지 점심만 시에서는 되게 들어 당연히 뒤ting도 그래서 그래 댕진이 맞게 때문에도 위시라 맞게 아니 분바 준비 또 확장장게 돼 되지 아유 ting 댕진이 마잉이 때문에 진바 마잉이 분바 진행 주요를 위해서는 요를 딱 이내 딩이가 맞게 비터는 분진 또 확장장게 돼야지 되지 페이지 아유 ting 이기 말이 ting
So the actual question here is, when there is no more grasping, when there's no more an awareness that grasps as inherent existence, there is still the thought I. The thought I still arises. But if that misperception that grasps at inherent existence of the I is no longer there, there is no longer pain. So there's a perception, the sensation is still there, however there's no sensation of pain. That would be kind of the issue, the question. Now Geshe-la has its own opinion with regard to this issue. If we were to discuss it, it would take longer than 2 hours. So there's no point to go into that kind of discussion regarding this. But Genla will share his opinion with you. So his opinion is that it is not possible, according to him, it does not seem to be possible to have a conceptual consciousness realizing, for example, Vas, realizing Vas, without having either a realization of the lack of inherent existence or a misperception that grasps at inherent existence. The Geshe-la is saying he doesn't think it's likely to have a conceptual consciousness without the influence of those two awarenesses, or without these two awarenesses.
네 티도 코란 요래 마스 조잉과 대인시도 지당하지체 근데 지금은 미치 싫어지나 마 렌로 슈칭무지게 디디가라 딘징기 진주 세고 요래서 해다보다 아니 미치 미니 숨시 미슈스는 지당하지체 디나는 미치기다 갈라고 캔서부지 제외이나 디디가라 딘징 진주 세고 요래서 해다보다 딘지 시에 딘지 용거로 이내 당분에 딘징마게 와체 아미디 두제 제용도 도난 수치를 주고도 디가스 신의 딘징기 위기제 딘지 시에바나 아니어도 사버래 가르세나 아니 베나 아니 가스거래 미치다체 디나로네 미치 루브르도 아니 강해지 채바이나 양 도난 수치를 주고 저 닝지기 비가라데 로야가도 지도 도난디 수치 도도시나 되게 나타나데 도난 수치를 주도 딘지기 위해서로 차주다 딜라바이나 닝지기도 딘지 수치를 줘 저 차액이 뒤에 요래 맨 초진에 단다 갈라오래 다 센자마다 뒤쪽에 달라차바디 당진디 마이팅도 다 당진디 먼저기도 통하면 유해가지고 시기도 디텐주얼의 집에 인기를 그 유해가지고 제가 딜라도 맞은 빌로디 가디제네 나 딘진디 그게 유해가지고 먼저 다 때문에 진행나 마 때문에 키보드 진행 가 진주디 다 신의 딘진디 요마로 마 진바디 요르와 디마도 딘진 때문에 키보드에 마치 아니 딘주기 키보드에 마치 마치고 진데 딘데 아이
Geshe-la is saying that so this is actually something weird when you think about so for example like when we are now many people in this room and I'm surrounded by this person, by that person, so if someone kind of gets up and is about to hit me, in that moment there's a very strong sense of I. We grasp very strongly the inherently existent I. Or, so in that moment it is very clear the sense of I when someone is about to hit me. or when someone does something kind of weird, someone does something weird, acts in a weird way, and so the way it affects one, there's like a very strong sense of I. For that person, there's a strong sense of I. So actually, Geshe-la is saying this is kind of weird in the sense that, does that mean it's not usually there, or is it more than that in that moment it becomes strong, we pay more attention in that moment because it's this situation that is unusual. So Geshe-la is saying that it doesn't make sense that it's not there usually, but we pay more attention. We pay more attention in the sense we become more aware of it when there's some problem, when there's some difficulty, etc. So only then we become aware. So this is why usually we're told to think of those situations to make to get the self-grasping children stronger, and so they're not able to identify the object that is being negated. So, but this should be the same also when great compassion arises. When there's a strong sense of compassion, then one's grasping onto the self should get stronger, because that's an unusual type of mind, and in that moment one pays attention to that strong self-grasping. And actually, according to the mind only, the Chittamatra school, they say that the mind that grasps the self-grasping mind, is always there. It is always present. So this is according to the Chittamatra school, and actually according to the Prasangita school, one should say that there's always a type of self-grasping, there's always a holding onto, there's always an awareness there that holds onto an inherently existing I. Of course, once one has realized emptiness, once one has understood that the self doesn't exist truly or inherently, one then perceives a self that is characterized by the lack of inherent existence. That is different. But Geshe-la says, if that mind is absent, that mind is absent, the mind that understands that the self doesn't exist inherently. And if the mind that grasps at the self were also to be absent, Geshe-la is saying it would be impossible actually to have a mind that just grasps at the I. So therefore he says, he thinks just a pure I appearing, pure in the sense that there's no sense of an inherently existing I, nor sense of a non-inherently existing I. To have a mind that just takes to mind the actual I. Geshe-la says he thinks that's impossible.
아니 디 가장 내래기 도 기지시에디 자외단다 도딜름지기 전주性변화가도를 거셔 도디 이내 디는 거죠 디는로 사담부 기점인도 최든지 대화를 등진생 가르레시나스 되는 거 거셔마도 예 사담부를 텐데셔 지진은 디 강들라 사담부를 주인 최든지 대화를 등이 더블에 숨 안대화를 등진 가르레나스 와도스 유시기로 지금은 뭐라 투바 인식으로 하다. 뭐에 내려보면도요. 네 쇼탕데 부디로 와. 간들이야 양 기시사 담보선 간을 매바 이내 기초서를 챙기다. 김생 가르에서는 사담보다다 단다디 먼저 공부 다가랑 유협이 돈에 사담보다 유협하다 땡케로 하다. 어느 사지바도 저 기시시에 있는 사지바에 디시고시다. 그래서는 정주생보다도 뭐 어느 초반 받체 아니 기와디를 사지바 미지비치를 세워도바디 개동나로 송여로 지선 딜레디 미지비치를 세워탑세디 사지바를 인규바디 염려하던 지문을 세워요래 디제는 기와디를 사지바 탑저디 부모들랑 자라와다 디지바지 키초서를 something.
So Geshe-la is saying that as he had talked about the sutric scripture before, the sutric kind of quotation he gave previously, in which it is said, which talked about the meditative stabilization of establishing only pleasant feelings, that when one, whatever object one observes, whatever object one pays attention to, that it is seen as a pleasant kind of object, because of that meditative stabilization that someone may cultivate. So Geshe-la says, I don't really remember what were the words before that. Maybe this is talking about a person of the first bhumi. It's very difficult for me to say. I just remember that exact passage, so I don't really know what it says above that quote or below that quote. And very difficult for me to actually check right now because it's a sutra, and I only have the long, loose scriptures, the long, loose pages, and it's very difficult to find something in them. So I'm not really sure what this refers to. But anyway, the point is here that it does make sense that there is that kind of meditative stabilization, such that whatever one encounters, one will see that object that one encounters as something pleasant. So whether that is true for someone on the first ground, but then one can also say that it's true for someone on the eighth ground, bodhisattva, because in the 8,000 Perfection of Wisdom Sutra there is this explanation, and this is also explained in the special insight section of the Namgyal Chömo, that there is a person who, with the same body that they attained the path of accumulation, that there's a bodhisattva who with the same body that they attained the path of accumulation with, they can also attain the 8th ground. So that would mean that such a person who can go so rapidly, who can achieve that 8th ground so rapidly, they achieve it with that same ordinary body. So it would be this ordinary body in the same place, it's the same as in the case of the first bhumi. When you attain the first bhumi, or the first ground of the bodhisattva, that is still the body of an ordinary person when you newly attain the first ground. So when you then apply it to someone who attains with an ordinary body the 8th ground, well, in both cases it would just be an ordinary body. It would be a body that is the result of the bodhisattva. 是出离菩萨也不至于构成太大的过失，因为在八地菩萨依旧有这种可能性发生，就是他的心已经处在另外一个状态，他的身体就是反复身体。
디네 경기 소녀들라 아니 가자 따든 제시 따든 디카레스 기지 좀라 메도 딘주를 따든 샤야지 따든 뭐주기 메도 신다 따디 따든 샤야지 아니 메도 따든 샤야지 이신에 따든 제시 기지 좀라 그래서 괜찮아 아니 메도 딘주 제시에 되다 메도 제시에 내지버리 샤스 따 디카레스는 메도 제시에 디 갈수고래 디메마체 타니도 유비메도 제비기 점에 마치 먼저로는 낭디에게 메도디 제비기 저레스 먼저로는 낭디에 메도디 딘주다 내지버레스 디르와 어디레스.
So Genosan Nima, he asked this question yesterday, the question that he gave to Genna. So Genna is now dealing with his question. So here his question regards the issue of searching for the object of imputation. So when searching or when analyzing, when investigating by way of ultimate analysis, the object of imputation is that object. Let's take the case of the flower. What you are investigating, what you're searching for, is that the actual flower or the truly existing flower? That is his question. So according to him, according to Genosan Nima's question, he's saying his assumption is that there's no difference to the person who's searching. There's no difference between the truly existing or inherently existing flower and the flower itself. Why? Well, because here he's not talking about the conventionally existing flower, but he's saying that the flower that appears to us is that exact same flower. The flower that appears to us is that truly existing flower. So therefore there's no difference between the two. So when you search for one, you search for the other.
네, 인치라 아니 난선난 디에게 메도 디니 여바시샤치니 데 개인전은 어서나의 메도세리 메도딘 주디니 직차도 여바시샤제 딜라 아니 토토지리 가야마 제비 토네 메도 덴주스니 수퍼시 다시문이 제나 아니 신이전 주비쇼스 조세 기제딘사레스.
So likewise, Genosan Nima is saying that it seems that there's no difference between the truly existing flower.
주토마지. 인지미지기 폐기비 자고데. 주토마지.
So when searching for the object of imputation, so Genosan Nima is saying that searching for the truly existing flower and searching for the flower are the same. So with regard to searching for the flower, if we search for the flower, so based on the existing flower that appears, but that we do not pay attention to. So then if we analyze whether or not the truly existing flower exists from the side of the basis of imputation, we will inevitably fall to the position of the subject. So with regard to searching for the flower, leaving aside just the existing flower, so we analyze whether or not the truly existing flower exists. When we do that, then we will inevitably fall to the position of the subject. So with respect to the existing flower, we don't pay attention to that. We just leave that aside. Pay no attention to that existing flower, but rather, if we investigate the truly existing flower, the inherently existing flower, and then search for it, analyze how it exists when engaging in ultimate analysis, then we inevitably fall to the position of the subject, not the Prasadika, but the subject.
第二年了，其实的马些光了，天地起，看了我嘞，每到天不准备当把事，那个呢，安尼天不准备考察下，每到的取证下，每到的天不准备的马来西亚，安尼不每到大概当啊，来的这不这些多，做当去，但每到天不准备当啊，些当每到人为呢。 看了我，越被动啊，些的，这个的那几个，第二对，安尼没到大概动啊，没到就是找不到，没到些大把马来些多了。然后超近呢，安尼看上来的，没到可能个月呢，但我是决定的呢，但我马上个月呢也不进来就要了，可能个月呢，安尼这个要马来，安尼。 그게 메이크업 제 아니면 당포 디 인증을 통해서도 그런 면에 제가 요 말에 세계적 시행주로 어디서도 기지 시단체는 그런 면에서 가져지셔 아니 최진디 그런 면에서 말에 이제 저던 레미도 디스크가도 메도 그런 면에 동발했어 그런 면에 매발했어 저기 가져도 유가 그런지 아니 메도 매 기자 많이 마셔 매도 유바 말에 기재도 많이 마시. 그런 면에 유바 말했어. 근데 그런 면에 유바 스티샤 안 메도디 디 말에 데스 개발인데. 개발이 용되는 뜻이다. 매도 그런 면에 유바 말에 시디. 그런 면에 유바 세지 파기샤. 매도디 인 그런 면에 유바 세지 말에 디도단디 많이 있는 거지. 그런 면에 유바 말에 그런 면에 매발에 그런 면에 인지물에 그런 면에 독자레스 나타지어로 어디서 주지는 그런 면에 매발했어요. 되게 되는 데서 민자와도 용되는 뜻도.
So here we say the flower is empty of existing truth. So the flower is empty of existing truth. Here, existing truly is like the characteristic. The flower is the basis of that characteristic. So the flower is the basis, and that does not exist truly. So there's a certain relationship where there's a basis and there's a characteristic. So likewise, if we say the flower is empty of existing as being permanent. So again, empty of permanent is the characteristic. The flower is the basis on which we base the characteristic. So likewise, here when we say truly existent or existing from its own side, does mean the same thing. Not being merely imputed, existing by way of not being merely imputed. Those are the same. So these are just different words. So when we use this as the characteristic, then it's like the flower does not exist truly. So there's that relationship between the characteristic and the basis. But there's another way of looking at it, saying like this is in English doesn't work. You can't say it that way. It's kind of saying by way of its own nature. So when you use it the way I just said, the characteristic, the basis of the characteristic is the flower. that the characteristic is existing by way of its own nature. So when you say it that way, then the flower, the basis, does not exist by way of its own nature. But there's another way of saying there is no naturally existent flower. There's no naturally existent flower. So that kind of means those two are kind of mixed together. You don't have the sense of the basis, the flower, does not exist by way of its own nature, existing by way of its own nature being the characteristic. And so this is like the example, for example, when you talk about a beautiful woman, you would say that this woman is not naturally beautiful because she wears makeup and the sun shines on her in a certain way. So when you express it that way, you talk about there's no natural beauty or it's not naturally. So it's kind of like you mix. There's two different ways of look at saying the same thing really, but it appears differently to the mind. So in one case you have the basis, on the basis of which we check out the object of negation. So the flower does not exist by way of its own nature, not existing by way of its own nature is the characteristic, or the flower is not naturally this, that, or the other. So it's just a different way of expressing it, and therefore a different way in which it appears to the mind. So whichever way one expresses it, what is important is in a Prasangika school, self-emptiness needs to be expressed. So empty of self-emptiness, this is what is being indicated according to the Prasangika school. Whereas according to the lower tenet schools, the Svatantrika, etc., it has to be other emptiness that is indicated, that is expressed.
Muzana methodi shisha cheni tida thode re kai ma cheni tenju seji sudu di chena rangi shozo togure se di samla tenji tangna tata chigido.
So therefore, if we think along these lines, as it says here with regard to searching for the flower, based on an existing flower that we do not pay attention to, if then we analyze whether or not the truly existing flower exists on the side of the base of imitation, we will inevitably fall to the position of the Svatantrika, well then that makes sense. That would actually make sense. The explanation Geshe-la just gave, and then looking at the sentence, well that would make sense.
来作为讨论的这种对象或者作为施设师的话，那这样就可以走向其他的路线，还是说对这样的解释呢？他是认为。
다 딜라 디자네 다 디마임베 다 단다 디 타니 저당 가시를 그지 시에이나 무서나 이 메도디 다 메도 텐주다 내지고 샤와이나 무서나 이 메도 메라 딜라바이나 아니 만수이주라 메도나 위로 텐티 맹이도 차루 르틴데베 제스다 간지 언제 통나디 언제로 된디기 통내 언제 통나 로로시디기 통내 언제 통나 네. 제가 다 먼저는 난데 얘기 메토디 요 말이에요. 다 먼저는 나의 메토메나 아니 메토시에 된 것을 만나의 메토시를 메토 유행이 아니 메토디 것을 나의 메토로
통신의 메토시
통신으로 지금 남기어로 먼저 메토 원에 있는 거 하면 원에 나오라 지대는 잘 원에 가지 메토 유행이 된 것을 낸 거 하면 아니 메도 인민된 것을 만나는 것을 난 진짜 메도 많이 비차로 저 어디로다 제가 딱 것을 난 진짜 메도 많이 비차나다 메도 진짜 참아 주면 다 것을
So also now Geshe-la is debating with Bunyasa Nimala, asking him, well, you were saying that the flower that appears to us does not exist, right? So therefore there is no correct consciousness or an accurate consciousness to which the flower appears. So then there was a little bit of back and forth. So then, so Geshe-la therefore said, so the flower that appears to us does not exist. And Genzo Nima says, no. So then Geshe-la said, so the flower does not appear. And Genzo Nima said, so the one that I see doesn't exist. And Geshe-la said, well, that means therefore the same thing. So that which is appearing to us does not exist. And the answer is no. The flower that exists does not appear. Because that which appears is not the flower that exists. So Geshe-la agreed it doesn't exist. So Geshe-la was saying, oh, so whatever appears to you is not the flower. Geshe-la said, yeah. So then, therefore, in our continuum, the ordinary flower, if it doesn't appear, then we do not have a valid cognizer realizing flower.
samlo tesa juro lo tesa dilla di ngazula na de metodi yomaris akola tangji yumurwa.
So therefore, the flower that appears to us and the flower, we have to say that they do exist. Actually, he's saying we have to say that they do exist. But saying that appearing flower, the flower that appears to us, in a way it seems to have that connotation that is the flower that exists from the side of the object. And to us is that flower that exists from the side of the object. It has kind of that little bit that connotation by way of saying the flower that appears to us. It seems to sort of have that connotation.
其实第几第三呢，搞老嘞，我说从大街上来接不到，아니 파기디 집대로 지다, 라나, 아니 다다다 파지 다 마찬가지 지기 엔티월리다, 가리 맥디리베 뎁디리베 가리디 라이와, 다 갑도당 진지 왕기, 갑도지기 빼는다, 뎁디 뎁지 뭐네 뎁디는 민두 파기디 집대다라나, 저런 맥잔 떼마로, 뎁디다다 떼무로, 그래서 수지 찍찍라. 어디 저부치디 아니 중내들의 유명해 변의 유명해 지금 부모 유명해 근데 쉬워 있나 아니 요말이 쓰니 봐서 가도 숨을 지그레스 지나더니 더 넘버를 막 숨는데 매매 숨바 간시라 강내 아니 부모가 되다가 이런 신기 동걸 남아서 가지 그거 제야죠 왜냐면은 와라 대한 진행 탄이기 된다고 많이 넣었어야죠 근데 요도 요러 봐 근데 가시게 된 순간 되게 말라네 그럼 매 송신 다다 지그레스 그래서 파주되기 아니 지다 유명 거랑 신거라 하자다만에 나 유명 더 그러면도 라 컨디션이 나 신주거들 삼었당 거기 뭐였는지 디라시 시다 샤비 톤에 디어르베 컨디션이 매 송신 다다 라체르고 그러니라 어디지네 아니 같이 개불 무슨 잘고 말해 수매 잘매 카드 숨을 지고 된지 숨내지도
So therefore, it always depends how we use words. There's a huge difference, or there's a difference how something is understood by way of how we use words, also dependent on the context. So for example, if Geshe-la were to say to me, give that to me, and he points at my table, well, I'm not really clear what he means. Does he mean the microphone? Does he mean the book? But if he were to say, well, I cannot find this in my book. What about yours? Right? What about that one? Right? Pointing at that. From the context, it is clear that he's not talking about the microphone. Geshe-la doesn't mean let me check the microphone. It's clear if it's not in his book and he's pointing at that, then it means that book over here. So therefore, similarly in the sutra, when it says, for example, a vase exists or doesn't exist, a vase is not there. In the sutra it says it's not there. Then from the context we can sometimes understand it doesn't mean it doesn't exist at all, but it means it doesn't exist inherently. Why? Because, well, sometimes we find, as we can find in the Heart Sutra, when it says at the very beginning, that the five ideas which do not exist inherently. When it it says that at the beginning, at an earlier passage, we know we can apply it to a later passage when it says there is no I, no ear, no nose, etc. But, and there's also other kind of quotations where it says we're talking about conventional, worldly existence and not ultimate existence. So there are these phrases. So then you know which context this is meant when someone asks, does it exist or not? You're talking about it from an ultimate point of view, that's kind of clarified with the previous passage, or in a worldly sense, that is also clarified. But in actuality, when just asking the Buddha about does this exist or not, well, usually it is clear because we know what existence means. We know what it means for something to exist. So then it can only be in the context of inherent existence, true existence, or intrinsic existence. So then it is okay for the Buddha in that context to just say, no, the vast doesn't exist. So this means basically one does not have to add, one does not have to apply the object of negation. Just saying it does not exist, it is clear that this is meant in connection with the object of negation.
이내다 딘지 송셰교디 코란나 따다 지기어디 먼저 때디 먼저 강다 와다 그래서 제지마저 카드 책들 때는 수매라도 추액이니까도 진짜 뭔부지 딘지 추디.
So for that person, in that moment who asked the Buddha, for this person this is clear. But for us, this may not necessarily be clear when we read this, when we hear this. We don't look at the words, the passages above those words. We do not look at the passages below those words. We just take it out of context and say, oh, it doesn't exist. So we get confused when it says there's nothing there.
이내 제를 무치기 고할린디 카드두슬링입니다. 책디키 어디든다 디레스 딘디키는 숨니다. 디 책디 고수단 컨데스 주도 동 컨데스 잡도 디 송서디 술을 송도 내단 컨데지고 와를 송도 야 코랑기 좀 샤저기 베제 신다는 로라 컨데도 디게디 차상 수초dom제데 디든다 디레스 제를 무치 송당데 디레도 파이심주 나온다 가시 맞아거든데 유서 카두가 강와 딘디 초동 맞아요. 카두 책디 도스키 아니 디레스 들라지
So, Matsukawa, for example, does never do that.